4 ways that Joe Biden could get America into a nuclear war, Michael Snyder reports. Have you ever looked at Joe Biden and wondered if this guy is going to get us all killed? If so, you are definitely not alone. Biden is an ill-tempered person that is not all there mentally, and his foreign policy team includes well-known warmongers such as Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, Victoria Nuland. Over the past 2 years, they've been provoking our enemies every chance they get, and that's pushed us to the brink of war with several of them. They keep telling us that they know exactly what they're doing, but if they get this wrong, then we're not going to get to do it over again. Once the missiles start flying, there will be no going back. The following are 4 ways that Joe Biden and his minions could get America into a nuclear war. Number 1 is Russia. The war in Ukraine has evolved into a full-blown proxy conflict between the United States and Russia, and both sides just continue to escalate matters. So where does this end? At this point, the Biden administration has already announced 36 different military aid packages for Ukraine since the war started. U.S. President Joe Biden administration announced $325 million in new military aid for Ukraine on Wednesday to help its military in its war against Russia, including additional ammunition for high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS for short, advanced missiles and anti-tank mines. And it's the 36th security package for Ukraine since the Russian invasion in February 2022, and brings total U.S. military assistance for the Kiev government to more than $35.4 billion in that time. On the other side, the Russians keep framing this crisis as an existential conflict between East and West, and Western leaders have certainly bolstered that perception by publishing maps of Russia broken up into dozens of little countries. At this point, the Russians believe that they are fighting for all the marbles, and Dmitry Medvedev is openly warning that they will use nuclear weapons when push comes to shove. He spelled out that Russian doctrine makes it clear that nuclear weapons may be used if Russia faces an act of aggression involving other types of weapons which threaten the very existence of the state. He added, "In fact, it's about using nuclear weapons in response to such actions. Our potential adversaries should not underestimate this," he says, and he adds, "All these speculations about how the Russians will never do this are worthless. The Western analysts and Western commanders, both military and political leaders, should simply assess our rules and our intentions," he said. Why won't our leaders take such threats seriously? I'm entirely convinced that the Russians are not bluffing, and it should greatly alarm all of us that Russian submarines are becoming increasingly active in the Atlantic Ocean. The Russians have been more active than we've seen them in years. Army General Chris Cavoli, the top commander for NATO and U.S. military operations in Europe, told Congress on Wednesday of Moscow's undersea capabilities. He said their patrols into the Atlantic and throughout the Atlantic are at high level most of the time, at a higher level than we've seen in years. Cavoli testified before the House Armed Services Committee. He said, and this despite all the efforts they're undertaking in Ukraine. Eventually, the Russians could use subs to launch a surprise first attack on the U.S., and if that happens, it will be the end of our nation as we know it today. Number 2 is China. As I've detailed in previous articles, the Chinese have been feverishly expanding and modernizing their strategic nuclear arsenal. At one time, their capabilities paled in comparison to our own, but now they have substantially closed the gap. Unfortunately, the Biden administration is still choosing to treat them like a vastly inferior power. We do not want a war with China, and under previous administrations, such a war was not even a possibility. But now the status of Taiwan has become a major international issue, and the Chinese just keep sending more military aircraft into the Taiwan Air Defense Identification Zone. Taiwan's Defense Ministry, in an early Friday update of Chinese military activities over the previous 24 hours, said 19 military aircraft had entered the island's air defense identification zone. One of those was a TB-001 drone, which flew around Taiwan first crossing the Bashi Channel that separates Taiwan from the Philippines, then up the east of Taiwan before crossing back towards the Chinese coast, according to a map provided by the ministry. In addition, sovereignty over certain areas in the South China Sea is another matter that has caused tensions between the U.S. and China to rise. The U.S. has warned the Chinese Coast Guard to stop harassing Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, it was reported. On Saturday, the U.S. State Department said in a statement, "We call upon Beijing to desist from its provocative and unsafe conduct." Last week, the Philippines accused China's Coast Guard of aggressive tactics and dangerous maneuvers in the South China Sea amid simmering geopolitical tensions between the two nations. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail and our relations with China will take a turn in the right direction, but I wouldn't count on it. Number 3 is Iran. As I've warned over and over again, a major war in the Middle East could erupt at any time, and just to make sure that tensions go a little bit higher, the U.S. have deployed aircraft equipped with bunker-busting bombs to the region. In a show of force to Iran, the United States military has equipped aircraft sent to the Middle East with advanced bunker-busting bombs, American officials told Wall Street Journal on Friday. According to the report, around a dozen 810 Warthogs were refitted to allow the attack aircraft to carry up to 16 of the precision-guided GBU-39B bombs. Of course, the Iranians are also choosing to make things even worse. In fact, the Iranian military just illegally seized a tanker that was headed for the United States. Footage has been released by the Iranian Navy that shows the seizure of a foreign vessel in the Gulf of Oman. The Marshall Islands flag oil tanker Advantage Suite was taken Thursday by Iranian forces after leaving Kuwait en route to Houston, the U.S. Navy announced. Navcent said Advantage Suite was seized by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy while transiting international waters in the Gulf of Oman. Unlike Russia and China, Iran does not have intercontinental ballistic missiles. But the Iranians are getting very close to being able to produce their own nuclear weapons, and some analysts believe that they already possess older nukes that have been provided to them by others. If a major war does erupt in the Middle East, Iran will throw whatever it has against Israel, and Israel will do the same to Iran. And let us hope that such a conflict can be put off for as long as possible. Number 4 is North Korea. You would think that the potential for 3 cataclysmic wars would be enough, but no, the Biden administration has also decided to greatly provoke North Korea by sending nuclear-armed submarines to South Korea. The United States will deploy nuclear-armed submarines to South Korea for the first time in decades, part of a new agreement that will signal Washington's commitment to defend Seoul, South Korea, against rising nuclear threats from North Korea, U.S. officials said. The plan to dock the ballistic missile submarines in South Korea, which has not happened since the 1980s, headlines an effort to make U.S. deterrence against Kim Jong-un's regime more visible. According to senior administration officials, it will also see the U.S. vow to give its ally a greater role in any response to a political nuclear attack. One rule that I try to live by is that you should never provoke crazy people, and in this case, the Biden administration is provoking crazy people that are armed with nuclear weapons. The North Koreans are not happy with the Biden administration's latest move, and they just issue a very angry statement that contains the words nuclear war, quote-unquote. North Korea will step up its military deterrence against South Korea and the United States, state media said Sunday, blasting this week's summit agreement between the two sides on strengthening the U.S. extended deterrence as a product of heinous hostile policy against Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. The Korean Central News Agency, KCNA, ran a commentary criticizing President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the U.S. this week as the most hostile, aggressive, and provocative trip and a dangerous one for a nuclear war. In April, North Korea tested a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile that is capable of hitting the United States. If Kim Jong-un gets angry enough, he could order his military leaders to nuke several West Coast cities. Of course, we could nuke North Korea in return, but nothing would ever bring those cities back. Most Americans don't realize this, but at this moment, we're closer to nuclear war than we have ever been before. Biden administration officials seem to believe that none of our enemies are crazy enough to actually use nuclear weapons, and so they are not afraid to be extremely aggressive with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. But what happens if Biden administration officials make a mistake and push one of them too far? This is not a game. One really bad mistake could result in hundreds of millions of deaths. So let's hope that someone can talk some sense to Joe Biden and the warmongers around him, because right now they really do have us on the brink of the unthinkable. And this is by Michael Snyder. This is by the author. He says, "My name is Michael, and my brand new book entitled End Times is now available on Amazon. In addition to my new book, I've written 6 other books that are available on Amazon, including 7-Year Apocalypse, Lost Prophecies of the Futures of America, The Beginning of the End, and Living a Life That Really Matters. When you purchase any of these books, you help to support the work that I'm doing. And one way that you can really help is by sending copies as gifts to family and friends. Time is short, and I need help getting these warnings into the hands of as many people as possible. I've also started a brand new Substack newsletter, and I encourage you to subscribe so that you won't miss any of the latest updates. I've published thousands of articles on the Economic Collapse blog, End of the American Dream, and The Most Important News, and the articles that I publish on those sites are republished on dozens of other prominent websites all over the globe. I always freely and happily allow others to republish my articles on their own websites, but I also ask that they include this about the author section with each article. The material contained in this article is for general information purposes only, and readers should consult licensed professionals before making legal, business, financial, or health decisions. I encourage you to follow me on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and any way that you can share these articles with others is definitely a great help. These are such troubled times and people need hope. John 3:16 tells us about the hope that God has given us through Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. If you've not already done so, I strongly urge you to invite Jesus Christ to be your Lord and Savior today. This is on End of the American Dream by Michael Snyder. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.